Hello friends, I'm Vitali. The Washington Post reports that during his most recent phone conversation with American President Donald Trump, Putin demanded, as a prerequisite for ending the Russian-Ukrainian war, that the Russian Federation be given control over the entire territory of the Donetsk region of Ukraine. Putin purportedly stated that he was prepared to relinquish control of the territories currently occupied by Russia. In the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions, that is, if Ukraine agrees to fully withdraw its troops from the entire territory of the Donetsk region. I'd like to remind you that reaching the administrative borders of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine was one of the primary objectives established for the Russian army as early as February 2022, during what was referred to as the unsuccessful Blitzkrieg. At that point, the Russian army was tasked with capturing Kiev to depose the legitimate government and establish conditions for collaborator rule in the Ukrainian capital. Furthermore, they were to occupy the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, areas whose self-proclaimed independence President Putin had acknowledged shortly before. However, in these demands put forth by the Russian president, if they were genuinely presented, there is a complete absence of any political logic. One might have been able to comprehend this political logic if Putin had been demanding the Ukrainian army's withdrawal from the territories of the Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia regions, all of which are designated by him as constituent entities of the Russian Federation. However, if Putin agrees that the Ukrainian army should withdraw from the territories of one Russian subject that he himself created, while he, in turn, will withdraw his own troops from the territories of two other subjects he fabricated, in this instance there is absolutely no political logic. And if you will, there is no military logic to it either. Yes, if the Russian army successfully advances to the administrative borders of the Donetsk region, it will then gain the capacity to establish itself in more strategically favorable positions, which would aid in the future occupation of Ukraine's eastern territories. However, if the Russian army were to evacuate the Kherson region and Ukrainian forces were to then occupy that territory, it would create an operational advantage for the Ukrainian army, allowing them to advance toward the liberation of occupied Crimea. And, as we understand it, for Putin, this is a much more unfavorable position than the possibility of occupying neighboring Ukrainian regions from the territory of the Donetsk region. Therefore, even if we were to assume that the Washington Post sources are indeed providing realistic information and that the Russian president truly offered the American president these terms to bring an end to the war, this could be exclusively a special operation designed to destabilize the situation within Ukraine itself. The aim is for Ukrainians to begin discussing this, leading to the emergence of both proponents and opponents of such a territorial exchange. So, in this way, internal destabilization in Ukraine would make it much easier for Russian forces to proceed with the further occupation of our territory. After all, if one cannot succeed in occupying the territory of an enemy state with the help of the army, then its internal destabilization helps to resolve all issues without the proper deployment of troops. The history of the First World War, as we know, the Russian-Ukrainian War is very similar to the First World War, vividly testifies to this fact. And why shouldn't Putin make use of historical experience if he continues to hold out hope for a victory over the Ukrainian state, leading to its subsequent disappearance from the political map of the world? However, it is important to note that American President Donald Trump is unlikely to endorse this particular approach taken by the Russian president. He emphasizes that the involved parties should halt their movements at their current locations. Specifically, both the Russian and Ukrainian armies are expected to solidify their positions along the current line of engagement. This is Donald Trump's idea, which he has been trying to promote literally since the very first days of his tenure as President of the United States. The cessation of fire along the line of military engagement and subsequent negotiations that would ideally result in a lasting peace. Well, as we understand, such negotiations could continue for many months, years, or even decades. And I'll state up front that if the fighting on the Russian-Ukrainian war front can indeed be halted, then a genuine peace between Russia and Ukraine, considering Russia's territorial claims on Ukraine and its willingness to declare Ukrainian regions as entities of the Russian Federation, a lasting peace may not be possible for many decades. And this is an objective reality that any citizen of Ukraine who intends to reside in its territory in the future needs to reconcile with. However, a ceasefire at a specific point in time, brought about by international pressure and the exhaustion of the warring parties, can indeed materialize. For Ukraine, the primary concern is that this ceasefire does not occur through the acceptance of Russian ultimatums, including the withdrawal of Ukrainian forces from territories currently under the control of the legitimate Ukrainian government, or by implementing such modifications to the Ukrainian constitution that would potentially transform Ukraine into a satellite country of the Russian Federation. This would, once again, assist Russia in the future with achieving its ambitious goal of destroying the independence of a neighboring state and annexing its territories to the Russian Federation without engaging in warfare. And so, this new information, suggesting Putin's desire to trade the Donetsk region for the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, is a component of that aggressive plan. It serves as a reminder that the Russian-Ukrainian war involves active participation not only from the Russian army but also from the Federal Security Service, highlighting their significant involvement of the Russian Federation with all its skills in sabotage and destabilizing the situation in the enemy camp. Thanks, friends. Stay tuned to this channel, subscribe to it, subscribe my social media, Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and Donatello channels, which help them grow. Use YouTube sponsorship. Victory and peace to you. Good luck.